Meet Thomas Hayes, a 46-year-old millionaire CEO in Atlanta, known for building empires, not families. But one evening, walking alone beneath the city lights, Thomas hears something that stops him cold. A boy, no older than 11, plays guitar on the sidewalk. His voice? Hauntingly familiar, almost like Thomas's own. That boy is Ethan, and the sound becomes a thread that pulls Thomas into a past he thought was sealed shut. Through whispers and records, Thomas discovers Ethan lives in an orphanage, and that his mother, Sarah, the only woman Thomas ever truly loved, died without him knowing. Worse, their love letters were intercepted by someone Thomas trusted most, his own sister. As the truth unravels, Thomas faces resistance not just from Ethan, who fears abandonment, but from his powerful family. His fortune becomes a weapon in a legal war to decide who deserves to call Ethan family. But buried in an old diary lies a symbol of hope. Sarah's wish for Thomas to be the father Ethan never had. One boy, one melody, and one final chance to make things right. Will Thomas earn Ethan's trust? Can a song rebuild what silence destroyed? Subscribe for more heartfelt stories about family, truth, and the power of love to heal, even when time seems lost. The last board meeting had run over, but Thomas Hayes didn't mind. Atlanta's early spring air carried the scent of wet pavement and blooming dogwood, and for once he wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. He slipped off his jacket as he strolled down Peachtree Street, the city lights flickering on one by one, reflecting off glass and steel. At 46, Thomas was still a man of precision, every suit tailored, every move calculated, but tonight something inside him felt offbeat, like a melody missing its last note. He paused near a small cafe where patrons sipped lattes beneath string lights. That's when he heard it. A guitar, delicate, raw, real. And then the voice. It wasn't just good. It was arresting. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, sat cross-legged on the curb, strumming with practiced hands and singing into the warm dusk. His voice was untrained but pure, and there was something eerily familiar about it. The tone, the phrasing, the break in the middle of the second verse. Thomas froze. The boy's eyes were shut as he sang, lost in the rhythm. His baseball cap was turned backward, shadowing a face that looked strikingly sharp beneath the streetlight. Angular cheekbones, narrow jaw, deep-set eyes that would be blue in the daylight. He couldn't explain it, but Thomas felt as if he were looking at a ghost, or maybe a mirror. The song ended. A few passers-by clapped politely, tossing coins into the open guitar case. The boy didn't react much. He just nodded, softly, and adjusted his fingers for the next chord. Thomas stepped forward, slowly. "What's your name, son?" he asked, trying not to sound too curious, too shaken. The boy looked up, suspicious but calm. "Ethan," he said simply. "That was incredible. Did you write that?" Ethan shook his head. "Nah, old blues song. My mom used to sing it." "Your mom has good taste," Thomas said gently. Ethan's face changed. Just a flicker, but Thomas caught it. A tightening of the jaw, the soft retreat behind the eyes. "She's gone," Ethan murmured. "Couple of years now." Thomas felt the air shift around him, the kind of silence that holds more than words. He didn't push. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. Ethan nodded, not needing sympathy, just acknowledging the truth. "It's all right. I stay at the home now, on Edgewood." Thomas blinked. "The children's home?" Ethan strummed again. "Yeah, St. Alora's." The name pulled something from the back of Thomas's mind. A memory he couldn't place. He stared a moment longer, his heart knocking hard against his ribs. "Your mom?" he asked carefully. "What was her name?" Ethan looked up, suspicious now. "Why, you want to know?" Thomas hesitated, then smiled, trying to soften the edge. She must have been someone special, just curious. There was a long pause. Ethan considered him with the guarded eyes of a child who's learned not to trust too quickly. "Sarah," he said finally. "Sarah Carter." Thomas stepped back. The name hit him like a brick. Sarah. His Sarah. It couldn't be. He remembered her laugh, the way she used to wear her hair in a loose braid, always tugging at it when she was nervous, the late nights at Georgia State, arguing over music and literature and what it meant to live without compromise. He remembered her tears when he left, when he chose legacy over love. And now, her son? He looked again, the shape of Ethan's chin, the way his fingers moved across the strings. That voice that could have been his at 11. Thomas swallowed hard. "Do you play here often?" Ethan shrugged. "When they let me out. Helps with stuff. I save what I can." Thomas's throat tightened. He glanced down at the bills and coins scattered in the guitar case. Not even $30. "Well," he said softly, reaching into his wallet, "let me add to it." He placed a crisp $100 bill gently into the case. Ethan's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," Thomas replied. "It was worth much more." For a moment, Ethan just stared at him, and then quietly, "Thanks." Thomas nodded, stepping back. "You take care of yourself, Ethan." He turned to leave, but his mind was already racing. Sarah Carter, a boy named Ethan, living at St. Alora's, singing with his voice. He needed answers. That night, Thomas stood in his penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline, untouched scotch in hand. The city lights flickered far below, but all he could see was the boy's face. The voice. Sarah. Could it be? As he stared out into the night, heart pounding, a single question echoed louder than all the rest. "Was that my son?" The boy's voice still echoed in Thomas's ears as he sat alone in his penthouse, the city spread below like a maze of memories and missed chances. He couldn't sleep, not after what he'd seen, what he'd heard. The guitar, the tone, that unmistakable resemblance, and then the name. Sarah Carter. She had been more than a memory. She had been a turning point. The only time Thomas ever questioned the path his life was taking, before London, before legacy, before power swallowed him whole. Now she was gone. He rose before dawn, the sky still dark beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and dialed. "Raymond, I need a full background check," Thomas said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. "A boy named Ethan, roughly 11 years old, lives at St. Alora's home on Edgewood. His mother's name was Sarah Carter." There was a pause on the other end. "You got a last name for the kid?" "I think it's Carter too, but check both." "Understood. I'll update you by this afternoon." Thomas hung up, the phone heavy in his hand. He walked to the kitchen and poured a cup of black coffee, though it tasted like ash. The silence of the penthouse screamed louder than usual. No music, no footsteps, just his own guilt ricocheting off glass and steel. Later that morning he sat in his office, the 63rd floor of the Hayes Financial Building, but his mind wasn't on mergers or quarterly reports. His team buzzed outside the frosted glass walls, oblivious to the internal storm he was hiding behind a perfectly knotted tie. At 2:17 p.m., Raymond called back. "Got what you asked for. The kid's name is Ethan Carter, born May 28th, 11 years old. Lives at St. Alora's home since 2021. His mother, Sarah Carter, passed away from complications related to a stroke." Thomas leaned forward, breath caught in his throat. A stroke? Yup. Happened suddenly. She was only 37. No other relatives listed except a half-sister out of state who declined guardianship. The chair creaked as Thomas sank back. "And the father?" "Father's name. Unknown. No one listed on the birth certificate, not even a blank space. Just not declared. Thomas swallowed hard. Where's the death certificate filed? Fulton County. And the boy, how's he doing? Raymond hesitated. School records say he's quiet, but bright. Plays guitar, writes music. Doesn't get in trouble, but there's a note from a social worker. He doesn't talk much about his mom, or trust adults easily. Thomas closed his eyes. The ache in his chest spread. Thank you, Ray. He ended the call and sat in silence. Sarah. Gone. He remembered the last time he saw her. They had met by accident, 4 years after college outside a coffee shop in Midtown. She had a teaching job. He was already knee-deep in corporate politics. They talked for an hour, laughed once. Then she asked if they could stay in touch. He never responded. It had felt safer, cleaner, to walk away than to open doors he didn't know how to keep open. And now, she'd been carrying a door for him all along. He stood, suddenly desperate to see the boy again. Not just on the street, not by accident. At 5:00 p.m. Sharp, Thomas pulled his Mercedes quietly along the side of the St. Alora's Home for Children. The brick building stood modestly against the late afternoon sky, its windows glowing with warm light. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the back, where a small courtyard stretched into patchy grass. He didn't go in. Instead, he parked across the street and watched. 10 minutes later, a group of kids came into view, filtering out the side entrance. And there he was. Ethan. Same ball cap, same guitar case slung across his shoulder. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. Just steady. Thomas stayed hidden, hands clenched on the steering wheel. He watched as Ethan sat down on a bench, opened his case, and began to tune the guitar. The boy's fingers were sure, practiced. Then, without warning, he started to play a soft, haunting melody. Something unfamiliar, but full of longing. It wasn't a performance. It was a prayer. A prayer Thomas felt he had no right to hear. But he listened anyway, heart thudding, memories flooding. When Ethan stopped, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A drawing. It looked like a music staff with lyrics written in a messy but precise hand. The boy stared at it a long moment, then carefully tucked it back into his case. Thomas's heart ached. He started the engine and drove off, the question louder than ever. If Sarah was gone, and this boy had no one, who would fight for him now? The melody Ethan played in the courtyard haunted Thomas as he walked through the echoing halls of his family's estate the next morning. It wasn't just the tune. It was the aching familiarity of it, like Sarah was trying to speak to him through their son's fingertips. If he was their son, he needed answers, real ones. That meant facing the one person who knew more than anyone else, and who had the most to hide. The library at the Hayes estate still looked the same as it had since they were kids. Floor-to-ceiling walnut shelves, a grand piano collecting dust, and Laura, his older sister, standing in front of the fireplace with a glass of red wine, as if she'd been expecting him. "Thomas," she greeted smoothly, "what a surprise. You haven't set foot in this house since Father's will." "I need to talk," he said, his voice low. She raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "Then talk." Thomas didn't sit. "Did you know Sarah Carter died 2 years ago?" The name hit Laura like a dropped glass, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, just long enough for him to catch. "I remember her," she replied carefully. "You dated in college. She was dramatic." "She's dead, Laura." Thomas stepped closer. "And she had a son, a boy named Ethan. He's 11, and I think," his voice cracked, "I think he's mine." Laura didn't flinch. Instead, she sipped her wine and stared into the fire. "Why now?" He swallowed hard. Because I saw him. I heard him sing, and I can't ignore it. Laura turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone sharp. You built your life without distractions, Thomas. You made it clear you didn't want ties. I didn't know I had any, he shot back. She sighed. Sarah wrote. Once, maybe twice. She was emotional, unstable. You were in London, closing multi-billion-dollar deals. What good would it have done? Thomas blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying, she replied coldly, I intercepted the letters. I read them, and I didn't give them to you. Silence, cracking, inside him. You what? Laura set down her glass. You were poised to inherit the Hayes Group. You couldn't afford scandal. Some woman from your past showing up with a baby and no proof? It would have ruined everything. Thomas's breath caught like glass in his throat. She wasn't some woman, Laura. She was Sarah, and he's my son. We don't know that, Laura said briskly. She never proved it. Because you never let me find out. His voice echoed through the room, breaking against the marble walls. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Laura folded her arms, tone colder now. You always had a blind spot when it came to her. She wasn't right for you, not then, not now. Thomas stepped back. You had no right. I had every right, she said flatly. I protected this family, everything we built. You're a CEO, Thomas. You don't get to chase ghost stories through orphanages. But he was already walking out. He didn't look back. That evening, Thomas sat in the back of his car, staring at the envelope on his lap. After leaving the estate, he had driven straight to his old storage unit, where boxes of college memories lay buried under years of dust and time. In one of them, under a folder of essays and a photograph of Sarah holding a sunflower, he found it. A letter, never opened, postmarked from 10 years ago, addressed to him in London. He opened it with shaking hands. Thomas, I know this may come as a shock, and I don't want to disrupt your life, but I felt you had the right to know. His name is Ethan. He's mine and yours. I don't want anything from you. I just want him to know where he comes from. If you ever want to meet him, just once, here's my number, Sarah. The ink had smudged in one corner, maybe from her hands, maybe from tears. Thomas sat in silence for a long time. She had told him, and he never knew, because his sister decided his legacy was worth more than his life. The letter trembled in his hands. He read it again and again until the words blurred. Outside, the city lights flickered to life, but inside the car it felt like the world had gone still. Thomas looked up, voice low and steady. Drive to St. Elora's, he told his driver. I'm going to meet my son. The letter Sarah had written, creased, yellowed, and never read, still trembled in Thomas's coat pocket as the town car pulled up outside St. Elora's. He stared through the tinted window at the modest brick building, the late spring sun casting long shadows across the iron gate. Kids were just beginning to trickle back in from after-school programs, backpacks slung low, and shoes scuffed from the playground gravel. But Thomas didn't see them. He only to Ethan, the boy who looked like him, sounded like him, played like Sarah, and had no idea who he was. Thomas stepped out slowly, smoothing his jacket more out of habit than necessity. This wasn't a boardroom. There were no shareholders here, just a boy and the echo of a woman he'd once loved. Inside the front office, the air was warm and faintly sweet, like cinnamon and floor polish. A receptionist named Maggie looked up from behind a cluttered desk, her eyes narrowing with curiosity. May I help you? My name's Thomas Hayes. I'm here to see Ethan Carter. Maggie blinked, surprised. Are you family? The word hit him harder than expected. I'm someone who knew his mother, he said gently. I believe she and we shared something important. Maggie studied him for a long moment, then stood. Wait here. Minutes stretched. When she returned, Ethan was at her side. The boy looked smaller indoors, his guitar slung across his back, scuffed sneakers tapping the tile. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just watched Thomas with a cool, guarded expression. I remember you, Ethan said flatly. From Peachtree. Thomas nodded. I was hoping we could talk. Ethan shrugged. Why? Thomas hesitated. Because I think there are things you deserve to know about your mom, and maybe about yourself. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Like what? Thomas took a slow breath. Like how she and I used to be close, back in college, and how I didn't know she'd... He faltered. Ethan crossed his arms. Didn't know she had a kid? Thomas nodded. Lot of people didn't, the boy muttered. Then she got sick, real fast. She used to sing, you know, even when her voice cracked. I know, Thomas said quietly. She used to sing to me, too. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, but he blinked it away. I came to see if maybe you had anything of hers, Thomas added. Letters, notes, anything that might help me understand. Ethan stared at him. You think I'm just holding her secrets for you? No, Thomas replied gently. I think you're holding pieces of her that I lost, and maybe you deserve to know the truth, too. Silence filled the room. Then, slowly, Ethan reached into his backpack. He pulled out a worn composition notebook, the corners bent, a few pages loose. She kept this, he said, offering it without meeting Thomas's gaze. Wrote in it all the time, mostly when she was too tired to talk. Thomas took the notebook with reverence, as if it might fall apart in his hands. He flipped to a random page and saw Sarah's handwriting, still familiar after all these years. Ethan asked again about his dad today. I didn't know what to say. I told him he had his voice. I told him he was brave, like his father once was, brave enough to dream, even when the world told him not to. I hope someday, Thomas finds out, I hope he forgives me. Thomas shut the book, his throat tightening. She didn't want you to know, Ethan said. Not really. She figured you'd moved on, built something bigger. She wasn't wrong, Thomas whispered, but that doesn't mean I should have stayed gone. Ethan sat on a bench, chin tucked in. I waited sometimes, thought maybe someone would show up. Some uncle, anybody. Thomas knelt beside him. I'm sorry. I should have been there. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a song, scribbled in pencil, half finished. Lyrics crossed out and rewritten. Some daddies build towers, some daddies build walls. Mine built silence. I waited through it all. Thomas read the line slowly, then looked at Ethan. You wrote this? The boy shrugged. Started it a while back. Thomas folded the paper carefully. Can I keep it? Ethan nodded, just once. As they sat in silence, Thomas finally asked, Would it be okay if I came again? Maybe we just talk, or play, no pressure. Ethan studied him, long and quiet, then softly, We'll see. Thomas rose, the notebook pressed to his chest. He knew this was only the beginning, but it was more than he'd hoped for. Outside, dusk was settling over Atlanta, the sky streaked with lavender and gold, and for the first time in years, Thomas felt something steady in his chest. A note held too long, finally finding its next breath. The song lyrics still echoed in Thomas's mind as he stood outside the orphanage gates again 2 days later, Sarah's journal tucked carefully in his coat pocket. Her handwriting, gentle, slanted, kept replaying in his head like a whisper. I told him he had his father's voice. Ethan's face haunted him. Wary, cautious, not angry, not quite, but heavy with the weight of disappointment no child should carry. That ache sat squarely in Thomas's chest now, heavier than any corporate failure he'd ever known. He hadn't meant to come back so soon, but something in him refused to stay away. Inside St. Alora's common room, he found Ethan sitting cross-legged on the floor, his guitar cradled in his lap, tuning it with practiced precision. The other kids were off in the next room watching cartoons. A plate of untouched mac and cheese sat nearby, growing cold. Ethan didn't look up when Thomas entered. Thomas didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat down slowly across from him, close enough to feel the vibration of the strings as Ethan plucked them, far enough not to crowd him. "I used to skip lunch when I was nervous too," Thomas said softly. Ethan glanced up, then looked away. "I'm not nervous." "Of course not," Thomas replied gently, with a small smile. "You're just thinking." The boy said nothing, but his fingers stilled on the strings. "I've been thinking too," Thomas added, "about that song you wrote, the one about walls and silence." Ethan looked up, eyes sharp. "You didn't have to come back." "I know." "Most people don't," Ethan muttered. Thomas took a slow breath, then reached into his coat and pulled out the notebook. Sarah's journal. "I read more," he said. "There's a page. She wrote after your first recital. She said you played a melody that made her cry. Said you had a way of putting her feelings into music when she didn't have the strength to speak." Ethan's mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost. "She kept all your programs, by the way," Thomas added, "even the ones you crumpled up because you thought you messed up the second verse." "I did mess it up," Ethan said quietly. "She said you made it better." A beat of silence passed. Then Ethan asked without looking up, "Are you trying to be my dad now?" Thomas's breath caught. "No," he said honestly. "Not yet. I'm not asking for anything. Not until you're ready. I just want to know you. However you'll let me." Ethan leaned the guitar against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees. "People come here sometimes. Say they care. Say they're looking to help. Then they leave." Thomas nodded. "And when they leave, it hurts more than if they'd never come at all." Ethan's voice was nearly a whisper. "Exactly." Thomas's voice softened. "Then let me stay. Let me show you I'm not here to disappear." Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't push him away either. That night, Thomas walked the long halls of his high-rise penthouse with the lights off. The city glittered beyond the glass, but inside, everything felt hollow. For the first time, his success felt like an empty room echoing with silence. In his home office, he pulled out a small wooden box from the back of a drawer. It was dusty, untouched for years. Inside lay the only photo he had left of Sarah. College graduation, her head tilted against his shoulder, sunlight catching the copper in her hair. He traced the edge of the frame with his thumb. "I should have fought harder," he whispered. Then he picked up the phone and made a call. "Hey, Cassie," he said, when his assistant answered groggily. "I need you to cancel next week's trip to Zurich." "Sir?" she said, confused. "That's the final phase of the Brentech deal." "I know," Thomas replied, "but something's come up." "Are you sure?" He looked down at Sarah's journal, open to a page where she'd written, "He'll never know the sound Ethan makes when he laughs in his sleep." "Yes," Thomas said, "I'm sure." The next afternoon, he returned to St. Alora's with a small, beat-up guitar case. Inside was the instrument Sarah had given him in college, scratched, worn, but still holding the same warmth in its cedar tone. "I thought you might want to hear it," he told Ethan, handing it over. The boy strummed it once, then looked up. "Why'd you keep this?" he asked. Thomas smiled. "Because your mom said music carries memory, and I never wanted to forget." Ethan strummed again, softer this time. The sound lingered, delicate and raw. Then he asked, almost without meaning to, "If I said I wanted to know more, About her? About you? Would you tell me? Thomas's answer came quietly. Every day. As the notes settled into the air, Ethan glanced over, voice tentative. Okay, maybe we can start with just playing together. Thomas nodded, a lump rising in his throat. That's all I ever wanted. But even as hope crept in, he knew one fragile connection could be shattered by fear, by doubt, or by a single person determined to keep the past buried. And back at Hayes Global, that person had already noticed his absence. The guitar had gone quiet, but Ethan still sat beside Thomas on the orphanage steps, his shoulders curved inward, the way boys carry secrets they don't know how to release. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The dusk around them deepened, washing the sidewalk in soft lavender. Thomas knew this moment couldn't last. Not when so much had been stolen from both of them. When he returned home that night, he didn't head to the wine cabinet or the television or the echoing silence of the penthouse's master suite. He went straight to his study, locked the door behind him, and pulled out Sarah's journal. The pages felt heavier now. Because somewhere inside this book, between lullabies scrawled in the margins and fragmented memories of hospital visits, he had seen the truth in ink. And now, for the first time, he allowed himself to read it all. One entry hit him like a blow to the chest. I wrote again today. I don't even know if he's getting them. Maybe Laura told him I was trying to manipulate him. Maybe she burned them. But Ethan is his son. He deserves to know. Even if he never responds, I need the truth to live somewhere outside of me. So I'll keep writing. I'll keep hoping. The name froze him. Laura. His sister. The one who'd managed his estate. The one who always said Sarah left because she wasn't the right fit for the Hayes legacy. His mind reeled. Slowly, he opened his desk drawer, pulled out a small cedar box with a brass lock, and found the stack of envelopes Sarah had written, all of them marked Return to Sender, all of them unopened, every one of them addressed to him. Tears stung the corners of his eyes as he traced her handwriting, the way her capital T curved like a violin's F-hole. He remembered how she used to pause at the end of each sentence while journaling, tapping her pen to her chin, always thinking 3 lines ahead. He clutched one of the envelopes tightly. Then, without a second thought, he got in his car. Laura answered her intercom with that clipped, perfectly practiced tone she'd perfected in boardrooms. "Thomas, it's late. You should have told me." Her sigh was audible even through the speaker. "Told you what?" He held one envelope up to the camera, let the name glare into her screen. "You blocked her letters. You knew she had Ethan." The door buzzed open before she answered. Inside her marble foyer, the tension pulsed like a pressure system before a storm. Laura crossed her arms, composed but pale. "I did what I had to. You were about to propose to a woman who came from nothing. Who could have—" "Who could have what?" Thomas cut in sharply. "Loved me? Given me a son? Reminded me of what it means to feel something real? She would have destroyed you," Laura snapped. "Do you know what our shareholders would have done if your name had been dragged into custody battles and hospital bills and—" "She died, Laura," Thomas said, voice low and trembling. "She died believing I abandoned her. She died writing letters that never got read." His sister stepped back. For the first time in years, her eyes glistened. "I didn't think she'd keep trying," she whispered. "After a while, I thought she'd moved on. You had no right to decide that." Laura didn't answer. Thomas pulled out Sarah's journal and laid it on the table between them. "She wanted me to know. She wanted me to be his father. She was just scared you'd ruin it again." When Laura didn't respond, he said quietly, "I need to go." She called after him, "You're not thinking clearly, Thomas. The foundation, the company, your name." He turned around, gaze steady. My name is Ethan's now." Back home, he sat in the dim light of his office, the journal open beside a half-played voicemail from Ethan, his voice soft and unsure. "Hey, Mr. Hayes, it's Ethan. I was just thinking, maybe next time we could bring 2 guitars. I got this idea for a song and I don't know, maybe it's dumb, but I think she would have liked it." Thomas didn't delete it. Instead, he picked up Sarah's journal again and flipped to the back. There, in smaller, shakier script, was a note addressed not to Ethan, not to herself, but to him. "If you're reading this, it means something finally reached you. I hope you see him. I hope you listen, and maybe in some small way this can be your beginning again, not for me, but for him." Thomas closed the journal slowly. His voice cracked as he whispered into the room, "I see him, Sarah. I see him." But just as that fragile hope bloomed, a knock came at his door. A courier, an envelope bearing Hayes Global's legal seal. Inside, a legal motion filed by Laura, petitioning the court to declare him unfit for guardianship, citing emotional instability, neglect of company interests, and absence of maternal consent. Thomas stared at the paper, then looked down at the journal in his lap. One hand on the page, one hand on the legal motion, and a single question rising in his chest. How do you prove you're a father when the world is already calling you a failure? The journal still lay open on Thomas's desk, when his lawyer, Andrea Lynn, entered the apartment. She didn't sit. She rarely did when the air was this heavy. "Thomas," she said quietly, holding up the document. She's serious. Laura isn't just trying to stall. She's going after full conservatorship. If this sticks, you won't even be allowed to apply for custody of Ethan. Thomas didn't look up. He couldn't. His fingers ran along the soft leather binding of Sarah's journal like it might still whisper something back. She said I was emotionally unstable. He finally met Andrea's gaze. Neglectful, obsessive. Andrea exhaled. She framed it as concern. Spun it to the court as a protective sibling stepping in while her brother spirals over the child of an old flame. It's compelling on paper. She's trying to erase him, Thomas said. Erase Sarah. And she's betting you'll lose control, that you'll prove her right. He clenched his jaw. Then I won't. But the next morning, as Thomas walked into the downtown courthouse, where Ethan's future would begin or end, he already felt like he was fighting shadows. Laura was there, dressed in solemn navy, standing beside a man Thomas had never seen before, Alan Kerrigan, a family law attorney with a ruthless reputation and a perfect conviction record. Kerrigan offered a polite nod. "Mr. Hayes, I believe we're both here with the boy's best interest at heart." Thomas didn't shake his hand. He turned to Andrea. "How do I win a war against my own sister?" Andrea glanced toward the courtroom. Not by shouting, not by unraveling, but by showing them who Sarah wanted to raise that boy. The hearing was closed to the public, but it still felt like standing trial under glass. Laura's attorney went first. "Your Honor, this is not about money. Mr. Hayes is a capable businessman, but we submit that he lacks the emotional stability, consistency, and personal history required to parent a grieving child, especially when maternal intent is unclear." "Unclear?" Thomas muttered under his breath, fists clenched beneath the table. Andrea stood. "With respect, Your Honor, we will present evidence that Sarah Montgomery, Ethan's late mother, intended Mr. Hayes to be involved in her son's life. Letters, a journal, voicemails left unanswered because someone intercepted them." Thomas's breath hitched as Andrea slid the journal forward, placing it gently on the bench like an offering. The judge flipped through it, pausing at underlined sections and folded corners. Laura, seated nearby, remained still, except for her eyes, which darted briefly to Thomas's. He could see something flicker there. Not regret. Not yet. Kerrigan stood again. And yet, we have testimony from Mr. Hayes's staff confirming erratic work absences, an abandoned company merger, and recent behavior suggesting emotional instability. Andrea didn't flinch. He walked away from a deal to fight for a child. That's not instability. That's fatherhood. Thomas closed his eyes. He thought of Ethan, of the boy's unsure voice on that voicemail. Maybe next time we could bring 2 guitars. Later that afternoon, the hearing paused for lunch. Andrea and Thomas walked outside, where the wind carried the scent of hot dogs and traffic fumes. "You okay?" she asked softly. He leaned on the railing. "No, but I'm not backing down." A rustling sound made him turn. It was Ethan. Standing there, small and unsure in the oversized coat the orphanage matron had given him, his guitar slung across his back like a shield. "Ethan?" Thomas blinked. "What are you doing here?" The boy looked down, then back up with quiet defiance. "Miss Paula from the home said I should speak if I had something to say, so I came." Thomas knelt to meet him at eye level. "You don't have to testify, okay? Not unless you're ready." Ethan hesitated. "Can I show them something instead?" He unzipped his guitar case. Inside was a wrinkled notebook. On the first page, in messy block letters, was the title, Family in C major. Thomas's throat tightened. "It's a song," Ethan whispered. "Not finished yet, but it's about what it could be like. You know, if I had someone." Thomas took a slow breath. "You already do." They walked back into court together. Ethan was given permission to address the judge privately in chambers. Thomas wasn't allowed inside. Neither was Laura. But 30 minutes later, when the door opened again, the judge stepped out holding that wrinkled notebook in her hand. She didn't say a word. She just placed it atop the journal and adjourned for deliberation. Thomas sat down, his heart racing. The silence that followed didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the beginning of something impossible. Could a song, written by a boy, one too afraid to call him Dad, be the bridge that turned a courtroom into a home? The courtroom had fallen quiet after Ethan left his song behind. Thomas sat in the hallway, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor like it could offer answers. Andrea paced beside him, phone in hand, murmuring to a contact at the firm. They were waiting for a ruling, but Thomas's thoughts weren't in legal chambers or custody statutes. They were with Ethan, his small hands on that guitar, the way his voice had trembled, but never broke. That song had cracked something wide open inside Thomas, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Legacy didn't live in quarterly profits. It lived in that boy's voice. Andrea returned to his side. "It's going to take days, maybe a week," she said softly. "But I think you made a real impression." Thomas nodded, barely hearing her. "I have to make sure he knows. I won't disappear." That night, Thomas drove back to his penthouse, but he didn't go in. He stared up at the tall building of glass and steel, the one that bore his name on the highest floors, and suddenly it all felt hollow. Inside was a finalized contract worth over $300 million, waiting for his signature. The merger with Delwyn Systems had been in motion for months. Laura had pushed hard for it before the custody battle began. She knew once Thomas signed, he'd be locked into board obligations that would span years. No court would grant custody to a man who could barely guarantee weekends. He sat in his car for over an hour, the weight of that pen heavy in his coat pocket. At 11:47 p.m., he texted his assistant. "Cancel the Delwyn deal. effective immediately. Notify the board by morning. 2 minutes later, she replied, "Are you sure?" He typed slowly. "I've never been more sure of anything." The fallout came quickly. The next day, Thomas walked into the boardroom to stunned faces. Laura was already seated, her posture icy, a folder of contracts open in front of her. "You pulled out?" she snapped before he even sat down. "Do you realize what you've cost us?" "I do," he said calmly, "and I'd do it again. This deal was supposed to secure our future." "Our future?" he repeated, standing tall. "No, this was about your idea of security. I've spent my entire adult life trading moments for money, and I'm done." "You'll lose everything," Thomas shrugged. "Then I'll rebuild. But I'm not letting another child grow up thinking he was unwanted just so I can add a zero to our portfolio." Laura stared at him, but this time she had no defense, only disbelief. He turned to the board. "If anyone wants to remove me, file the paperwork, but I won't sign away time I haven't even had a chance to earn with my son." He walked out, shoulders lighter than they'd been in years. That evening, Thomas drove to the orphanage with a brown envelope in hand. Inside were two things: a copy of the canceled Delwyn contract and a photograph. The photo had been folded and refolded so many times the corners were soft and bent. It was one of the only pictures he had left of Sarah, taken on a rainy day in New Orleans. She had been laughing, hair pulled back, a guitar balanced in her lap. Ethan was outside, sitting on the back steps, strumming quietly. Thomas approached slowly. "Hey," he said softly. Ethan looked up, wary, but he didn't move. "I wanted to show you something." Thomas handed him the envelope. Ethan opened it, his fingers tentative. He stared at the contract. "What is this?" "A deal," Thomas said, kneeling beside him. "A big one. Would have made me a lot of money." Ethan frowned. "Why didn't you sign it?" Thomas smiled, eyes tired but warm. "Because I want to be here. With you. Not behind some desk across the country while someone else tucks you in." Ethan blinked, glancing at the photo underneath the papers. "That's her," he whispered. Thomas nodded. She was incredible. They sat in silence, the evening air cool around them. "She used to sing that song," Ethan said, brushing his thumb along the picture. "The one I played in court. I thought maybe if you heard it, you'd understand." "I did," Thomas said quietly. "More than you know." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a broken guitar pick. It had once belonged to Sarah, cracked years ago on a street corner during a set. She had refused to throw it away. Ethan held it gently like it was glass. "She told me about this once." Thomas exhaled. "She carried it with her until she got sick. Now I want you to have it." Ethan looked at him, eyes uncertain. "Are you really going to stay?" Thomas nodded, his voice steady. "I gave up a fortune to prove it. But more than that, I'm here because I want to be. Not out of guilt, not out of duty, just because you're my son." Ethan didn't speak. He didn't cry. But for the first time, he leaned into Thomas's side. And stayed. The quiet weight of Ethan's head resting on his shoulder still lingered in Thomas's chest the next morning. It wasn't just the gesture. It was the shift. The unspoken answer to the question he'd been silently asking since the day they met. "Can you trust me?" Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his study with Sarah's journal on his lap and Ethan's handwritten lyrics beside it, reading and rereading the words like they were scripture. There was a softness in Ethan's song, tentative, raw, but unshakably honest. A house with no doors, but a window for hope. A man with my voice, who stayed. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. Later that afternoon, Thomas returned to the orphanage with something small tucked inside a leather case. He waited until Ethan finished his homework at the corner table, surrounded by the scratchy quiet of the common room. When the boy finally looked up, Thomas offered a careful smile. "I brought you something," he said, lowering the case onto the table. Ethan hesitated. "Is it another book?" Thomas chuckled softly. "Not this time." Ethan opened the case slowly. Inside was a hand-built mahogany guitar, its wood rich and warm, with small initials engraved at the base of the neck. S-E-H. Ethan ran his fingers gently across the strings, then blinked. "These are her initials." Thomas nodded. "She used to dream of giving you one someday. I just finished the thought." The boy swallowed, his fingers frozen over the frets. "Why would you do that?" "Because your song meant more than you know, and because I want to hear the next one." They sat outside on the orphanage's worn bench as the sun dipped behind the church tower. Ethan strummed tentatively at first, then with more confidence. Thomas listened, not interrupting, not correcting, just watching. After a few chords, Ethan looked up. "I'm still mad," he said bluntly. Thomas didn't flinch. "You have every right to be. She wrote to you. She waited." "I know," Thomas said softly, "and I hate myself for not knowing sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Ethan stared at him for a long moment. "Prove it. Write something. Like lyrics." Thomas blinked. "Me? You said you wanted to hear the next one. Songs are better together." Thomas smiled, then nodded. "All right. But I'll warn you, I haven't written anything since business school, and it was a marketing jingle." Ethan cracked a smile. "Try anyway." They spent the next hour on a melody Ethan had been humming for days. Thomas scribbled tentative words, fumbling at first until the verses began to echo back pieces of their shared grief, their hesitation, and the cautious bond forming between them. One line, Ethan whispered out loud as they worked. "He didn't come to fix me. He just came to listen." Thomas paused. "That one stays," he said quietly. Later that week, Thomas arranged a small gathering at the shelter. Just a handful of staff, the kids, and a few volunteers who had known Sarah. No cameras, no suits, no headlines. It was Ethan's idea. "I want people to know she mattered," he said. So, under a string of borrowed lights, Ethan took the small stage at the front of the cafeteria. He didn't wear anything fancy. Just jeans, his hoodie, and Sarah's guitar pick hanging from a string around his neck. The room fell silent. Thomas stood in the back, his arms crossed, trying to keep his emotions steady. Ethan cleared his throat and spoke into the mic. "This is a song I wrote, for my mom, and for someone else too. Someone who didn't know he had a song waiting for him." He strummed the first chord, and something in the room shifted. The lyrics weren't polished. They weren't studio perfect. But they were Ethan. Honest. Open. Brave. "Maybe family's a song you find." After silence. Thomas blinked hard. His throat tightened. As Ethan played, Thomas caught Margaret's gaze across the room. She was already wiping tears from her eyes. The final chord echoed through the quiet. Then silence, then applause. But not the kind you hear at business galas or boardrooms. This was different. Raw, thankful, earned. Ethan looked toward Thomas through the crowd and smiled. That night, as they packed up together in the dim cafeteria, Ethan reached into his pocket. "I made something," he said, pulling out a folded sheet of lined paper. Thomas took it and opened it carefully. It was a drawing, rough and childlike, but clear. 2 stick figures sitting on a bench, one with a guitar, the other holding a coffee cup. Above them, the word family, scribbled in bold crayon. Thomas didn't speak. He simply reached out and hugged Ethan close, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Thank you." But the warmth wouldn't last forever. The next morning, Thomas received a call from Andrea. "You need to get down here, now." At the law office, Thomas found her waiting with a folder already opened. "Laura filed for emergency injunction. She's claiming you're emotionally unstable, reckless. She's using your canceled merger as proof of erratic behavior." Thomas's heart dropped. "She's trying to block custody entirely," Andrea added. "Full termination of rights." Thomas sat down hard, his knuckles white on the edge of the table, and for the first time in this fight, he felt fear claw its way in. Thomas sat in Andrea's office with the emergency injunction trembling in his hand, his knuckles white against the paper. The words were brutal, unfit, emotionally compromised, financially reckless. It was Laura's final play, and it was meant to bury him. "She's using the canceled merger as proof," Andrea said carefully. "Says you're no longer in a position to provide a stable environment. She's requesting full termination of any custodial petition." Thomas looked up slowly, his voice rough. "She's trying to erase me. From Ethan's life. From Sarah's life." Andrea nodded solemnly. "She's betting the court will protect the institution over the individual." Silence stretched between them, the kind that lives in grief and war rooms. Then Thomas asked, "What do we have left?" Andrea walked to her desk drawer and pulled out a small stack of pages, old, yellowed, torn around the edges. "These," she said gently. "The orphanage found them this morning, hidden in a folder Sarah left with one of the former social workers, Paula Jenkins." Thomas took the pages slowly. They were letters, dozens of them, each addressed to him, each returned. And at the bottom of every one, his name, carefully written in ink Sarah must have prayed would reach him. Andrea continued. "Apparently, Sarah entrusted Paula with a sealed envelope before she passed, asked her to give it to Ethan when he turned 18, unless someone else proved worthy sooner." Thomas's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Sarah's voice echoed in every line. "Thomas, if you're reading this, then somehow mercy found you. I didn't write for money or pity. I wrote because I believed, even after the silence, that part of you still cared. Ethan is yours, not because of blood, but because of the way he listens, the way he feels. You gave him that, even from afar. If you're ready to love him, then fight for him, not with power, but with presence." Thomas shut his eyes, the words cutting deeper than any courtroom argument ever could. The next morning, Thomas and Andrea stood in front of the judge again. Andrea's voice didn't shake. "Your Honor, we are submitting direct evidence of Sarah Montgomery's wishes, not speculation, not theory. Her words, preserved, protected, and unaltered. They affirm her hope that Mr. Hayes would one day be the father Ethan needed." She handed over the envelope. The judge read in silence. When she looked up, her expression was different, less clinical, more human. "And these were found at the orphanage?" she asked. "Yes," Andrea said, "by staff who had no stake in the custody proceedings. They confirm Ms. Montgomery's intent." Kerrigan, Laura's attorney, stood to object, but the judge raised a hand. "I've seen enough." Then she turned to Laura. "Ms. Hayes, did you know these letters existed?" Laura stood frozen for a beat, then shook her head slightly. "No, Your Honor," but her voice lacked the conviction she'd once carried like armor. The judge narrowed her gaze. "Then why did several of them bear your handwriting in the return to sender markings?" Laura's silence spoke louder than words. Thomas didn't gloat. He just closed his eyes and let the truth land softly. Finally. After the hearing, Thomas stepped outside into the afternoon sun, the courthouse steps warm beneath his shoes. Ethan waited near the fountain, fiddling with the edge of his guitar strap, nervous energy in his hands. Thomas approached slowly. Ethan looked up. "Well?" Thomas smiled. Small, but real. "We're one step closer." Ethan didn't say anything right away, then he pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I finished the song." Thomas blinked. "You did?" Ethan nodded. "I added your verse. The one about the man who stayed." Thomas swallowed. "Can I hear it?" Ethan hesitated. "Not yet. I want it to be a surprise, maybe at the next shelter concert." Thomas chuckled. "Deal." Then Ethan asked quietly, "Is it really over?" Thomas placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "Almost. One more step, but this time we've got proof. Her voice, in her own words." Ethan looked down at the sidewalk. "I used to think if I sang loud enough, maybe she'd hear me." Thomas's voice cracked as he said, "She did, and now so will everyone else." That night, Thomas returned to the shelter and met with the director, Miss Campbell. She poured 2 cups of chamomile tea in her cramped office and pushed a folder across the table. "We've been reviewing Sarah's file again," she said softly, "and we found something else. A note she wrote to our former supervisor. It wasn't in the legal records, just tucked behind an old photo of Ethan." Thomas unfolded it slowly. "If Thomas Hayes ever comes for Ethan, don't fight him. He is his father, even if he doesn't know it yet." He stared at it, then looked up. Ms. Campbell smiled. "We'll testify to everything. You're not alone in this." Thomas's heart swelled with gratitude. "Thank you." "No," she said gently. "Thank you. You're rewriting a story most people would have given up on." As Thomas left the shelter that night, he found Ethan outside, sketching in a little notebook under the porch light. The boy looked up. "You think she'd be proud of me?" he asked. Thomas sat beside him. "I think she already was." Ethan smiled. Then he handed Thomas the notebook. On the page was a drawing, a stage, 2 guitars, and 3 words scribbled in the corner. "Home. Finally. Together." But, just as the moment settled into warmth, Andrea's number lit up Thomas's phone. He answered. Her voice was tight. "Laura's fighting back. She's calling for a formal family review. It's going public." Thomas gripped the phone, jaw set. Then he looked at Ethan, who was now quietly strumming his song in the twilight, and whispered, "Then let them watch. We've already won what matters." The air outside the courthouse was unusually still as Thomas stood on the steps, Ethan by his side, both holding their breath in the pause between storm and sunlight. The hearing had ended just 30 minutes before, but the judge had promised a written ruling within the hour. Neither of them could sit, so they waited. Thomas glanced down at Ethan, who was flipping his worn sketchbook open and shut, the edges frayed from weeks of quiet drawings and song scribbles. "You nervous?" Thomas asked gently. Ethan nodded without looking up. "What if it's not enough?" "It was the truth," Thomas said, "and the truth always echoes, even when people try to bury it." Ethan finally looked at him. "Do you think she heard us, Mom?" Thomas's throat tightened. "I think she chose us, long before we ever knew." They sat in silence until Andrea stepped out of the courthouse holding a thin envelope. Her expression gave everything away. "It's done," she said softly, walking toward them. "The judge ruled in our favor." Thomas exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a decade. "You are officially recognized as Ethan's legal guardian," Andrea said, smiling now, "with full custodial rights." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Does that mean I can come home?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Thomas reached down, hand trembling, and took his son's fingers in his own. "No," he said quietly. "It means you are home. Wherever we go, it starts with us." Later that afternoon, news of the ruling broke across business channels and gossip blogs. Headlines read like scandal bait. Hayes family rift exposed. Sister's scheme. Backfires. CEO trades power for parenthood. Secret son's letters destroy corporate dynasty. Laura's name was everywhere, but not in the way she was used to. Public trust eroded fast. Investors pulled back. Her board seat at Hayes Global was suspended pending internal review. Andrea called Thomas that evening with an update. She's going quiet. Her attorney dropped her. She'll survive, but her credibility's gone. Thomas didn't gloat. There was no victory in seeing the people who raised you fall under their own weight. She never saw Ethan as a person, he said slowly. Only a threat. Well, Andrea replied, the court saw him for who he is, and who you are. Thomas hung up and turned toward Ethan, who was curled up on the couch, strumming softly on the guitar Thomas had given him. You still writing? Thomas asked, walking over. Ethan nodded. I'm calling it Sarah's song. It's not done yet, but I know how I want it to end. Thomas sat beside him. How? Ethan looked up. With light, like the kind that breaks through when you think morning won't come. Thomas smiled. Then we better play it at sunrise. A few days later, Thomas invited Ms. Campbell from the orphanage and Paula Jenkins, the social worker who had protected Sarah's letters, to join them for a quiet dinner. Ethan helped set the table. He folded napkins into little triangles and placed Sarah's journal gently in the center, surrounded by lavender flowers. She used to put these in her hair, he said, arranging them. Said they made her feel brave. Paula smiled warmly. She was braver than most people I've ever met. As they ate, they shared stories. Sarah singing lullabies in the hallways, her laughter echoing during lunch duty, her quiet moments staring out the window whenever she missed someone she hadn't seen in years. Thomas listened to every word like it was a lost verse in the song he'd never gotten to sing. After dessert, Ethan brought out the drawing again. The stage with 2 guitars and the words, home, finally, together. He handed it to Paula. It's yours now, he said. You kept her words safe. You helped me find him. Paula pressed a hand to her heart. I just did what your mom asked. No, Thomas said gently. You gave us a second chance. That night, as Ethan settled into his new room, his own guitar hanging from the wall, a window overlooking the city lights, Thomas stood in the doorway, watching him quietly. Dad? Ethan asked. It was the first time he'd said it. Thomas felt it like a sunrise behind the ribs. Yes? Ethan smiled shyly. Can I sing it for you? The finished version? Thomas nodded, stepping in and sitting on the edge of the bed. Ethan began. It wasn't perfect. His voice cracked on one note. The chord progression wobbled in the bridge, but it was real, and the last verse, added just hours before, hit Thomas straight in the heart. He showed up when the silence screamed, gave up the gold for what love means, and now I know I'm not alone. We wrote a song and called it home. Thomas couldn't speak. He just reached over and wrapped Ethan in a hug that said everything he didn't have words for. But deep down, he knew. They weren't finished yet. There was still more to build, more to give, and more children like Ethan who needed someone to hear their song. The last notes of Ethan's song still echoed in Thomas's chest the next morning, like a memory refusing to fade. Sunlight streamed through the windows of their home, and everything felt different now, not because of the ruling, not because of the headlines, but because, for the first time in years, Thomas felt anchored. Ethan was in the kitchen humming to himself as he packed his notebook and guitar into his worn case. His hoodie sleeves were rolled up, revealing the faint ink stains on his arms from late-night lyrics. "You ready?" Thomas asked, leaning in the doorway. Ethan grinned. "Almost. Did you remember the ribbon?" Thomas held it up, a wide satin strip in deep blue, the exact color Sarah used to wear in her hair. Ethan nodded, serious now. She would have liked today. Thomas stepped closer and said quietly, "She would have loved it." The small auditorium filled faster than they expected. Kids from the shelter, local musicians, old friends of Sarah's, even a few reporters, though Thomas had requested no press coverage. This wasn't about him, or even about Hayes Global. It was about legacy, the kind that sang instead of shouted. A banner stretched across the modest stage. The Sarah Hayes Music School, opening day. Thomas stood near the door, watching as Ethan helped a younger girl tune her donated violin. She must have been no older than 8, with fingers too small for the strings, but eyes full of fire. "You sure this will work?" Andrea asked beside him, arms folded. Thomas smiled. "We don't need perfect. We just need passion." Andrea shook her head, half teasing. "You do realize you've just pledged the next 5 years of your life to a non-profit, right?" "I've had worse investments," Thomas replied softly. "At least this one's guaranteed to grow." They both turned as Ms. Campbell stepped to the mic. She cleared her throat, then began. "This school began as a letter, one no one read, a song no one heard. But it ends here, with voices finally being listened to. On behalf of Sarah and all the children still waiting for someone to show up, welcome." Applause filled the room, and then Ethan took the stage. No script, no suit, just his guitar and that blue ribbon tied around the headstock. He adjusted the mic and glanced at Thomas before speaking. "This school isn't just named after my mom. It's what she believed in, that music could save people, that being seen and heard could heal things no one talks about." He strummed a few chords, then added, "She taught me that even silence is part of a song, as long as someone listens." He played, and no one moved. It wasn't just a performance. It was a thank you. To his mother, to Thomas, to the people who fought for a child they didn't owe anything to. One verse rang out gently. "He brought back the melody buried in grief, gave me a father, gave me belief. Now we build not towers, but strings, and teach the world how hope still sings." After the performance, as people filtered out, Thomas stayed behind with Ethan. They walked the quiet halls of the new school, passing classrooms with glass walls, acoustic tiles, and shelves lined with second-hand instruments. At the end of the corridor, a plaque had been installed. It read, "Dedicated to Sarah Montgomery Hayes. A voice never forgotten. A mother never silenced." Ethan ran his fingers across the brass letters. "You think we'll help other kids like me?" he asked. Thomas nodded. "We already have." He crouched beside his son, meeting his eyes. "I used to think legacy was about buildings, stock options, power, but I was wrong." Ethan tilted his head. "What is it really about?" Thomas glanced back at the hallway, where a boy was testing out a trumpet for the first time, his cheeks puffed like balloons. "Legacy is what lives after the noise," Thomas said. "It's the quiet things, the people who stay." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then let's make a lot of quiet things." Weeks passed. The school grew. Ethan taught his first class, Intro to Songwriting, with 6 eager kids who all brought their pain into melody. Thomas built partnerships, quietly funding scholarships for students who couldn't afford instruments. Not once did he ask for his name to be on the door. One evening, as they locked up, Ethan handed Thomas a folded piece of paper. Another drawing. This time, it showed a classroom full of kids, guitars, pianos, drums. In the corner, a small quote written in childlike block letters. "We don't rescue people. We remind them they were music all along." Thomas held it for a long time. "I think," he whispered, "this is the best thing I've ever built." Ethan bumped his shoulder and said, "We built it together, remember? And in that moment, surrounded by echoes of laughter, chords floating down the halls, and the spirit of a woman who had never stopped believing, it was clear. This wasn't an ending. It was the first note of a brand new song. One neither of them would ever stop singing.